With Josh McDaniels out in Las Vegas, we brought on the Ringer's Austin Gayle to see who could be next around the NFL. We're ranking the hottest seats for NFL head coaches on today's Renner Ranks.
This is Renner Ranks, the ultimate NFL ranking show. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
To today's episode of Renner Ranks, your go-to daily rankings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you to all the everydayers out there for ranking Renner Ranks your go-to. Don't forget to subscribe, follow on YouTube, wherever your podcast. It does help out a lot. I'm your host, Mike Renner, NFL draft analyst for The Messenger at Mike Renner _ on any social media. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. This crossover Thursday episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code, all lowercase, LockedOnNFL for first deposit match up to $100. As I said at the top, Austin Gayle joins, as he does every Thursday. And we thought no better way for the resident Raiders fan to discuss Josh McDaniels and the other coaches that may be on the hot seat. It's a long one. They tend to be that way with Austin Gayle. But let's get right into it. All right, Austin, as the resident Raiders fan, with obviously you got the shirt on right now. Give me the Josh McDaniels reaction. Where's our head at?
So I wrote a piece for TheRinger.com. Go check it out. It sums it up well in the headline, honestly. Mark Davis hired Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler from the New England Patriots organization with the expectation that it would have success like the New England Patriots organization once had with Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, etc. He said, I quote, in the introductory press conference that ran for 45 minutes, "We're leveling up. We're going to the next level. We are not rebuilding. We are not reloading." Josh McDaniels comes in that opening press conference and he says, "I can win with Derek Carr here." Ziegler says loyalty, hard work, culture, all the buzzwords every GM and coach have ever said in any press conference. And it was all essentially, right? You see how quickly they made big splash moves for a former Patriot, Chandler Jones. First and second round pick for Devontae Adams and made him the highest paid receiver in the league. And then a contract restructure with Derek Carr that essentially was all funny money that allowed him to get out of the contract after that year anyway. The same guy that Josh McDaniels said he could win with, and he brought his college buddy over for, he has then essentially doesn't win with, goes 6-11, doesn't work with, even Devontae Adams, like leading the league in receiving yards, doesn't work. Josh Jacobs leads the NFL in rushing yards, doesn't work. What ends up happening is that he gets another swing of the bat, right? He goes after Jimmy Garoppolo, and he gets Jacoby Myers, another former Patriot. He thinks that's all going to solve it. And I think what ultimately happened, and what I keep reading too, is in addition to losing, being a loser, a failure, players hated him. Like they hated him. Like there was the NFL PA survey that came out and said, players don't like the coaching staff because Josh McDaniels does too long of meetings and holds people late at practices way more than any other coach. You had him leaking Darren Waller's wedding info at the combine and then trading him 10 days after his wedding. You have multiple players on record at the Broncos organization and at the Raiders organization saying that they disagree with some of these things. And Mark Davis held a players meeting, I think it was last night, and he's like, "What's going on?" They're like, "This guy fucking sucks," essentially, right? I mean, that's kind of what ended up happening because he did not have a worse 2-year start than a lot of other coaches, right? Dan Campbell lost more games. There are other coaches that have had longer leashes in their first 2 seasons. He's the only coach in NFL history hired and fired within his first 2 seasons as the head coach. Same thing happened in Denver, and the same thing now happens in Vegas. I guess my reaction was, thank God. I don't want to have this broken record playing all season long, right? I mean, you don't want to continue to hear we need to work on things, blah, 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 and then carry potentially Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels into next season. But the other thing too is like this failure is on Mark Davis. Mark Davis, who took the reins of the team when his dad died in 2011, has hired 4 head coaches now. Dennis Allen, Jack Del Rio, John Gruden, Josh McDaniels. He's hired 3 GMs, Reggie McKenzie, Mike Mayock, and Dave Ziegler. Through all that, since in like a little over 10 years, he is the one who I think the target is on now to actually, you have to make a change. You have to change your process in terms of who you're hiring and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. My reactions were like happy, but at the same time, it it still sucks. As a Raiders fan, it sucks that it's an endless cycle of just failure and this non-commitment to excellence, as everyone says.
Yeah, it does. It is going to be interesting to me to see where like they go, who comes in and what their strategy then ends up being, because what they should have done when McDaniels took over was, he had a 6-year contract. It should have been, we're not close to the Kansas City Chiefs. Objectively, we are not good enough to compete. I don't care what moves we make right now. So we need to look 2 years down the line. If you can't compete this year, probably weren't going to be, you got to think further down the line. What's the strategy that's going to get us to compete? And instead they're like, no, we're 2 moves away from competing with the Chiefs right now. And you just go through their decision by decision, like what Ziegler and McDaniels did building this roster, or like, not building this roster. Did they get a single thing right? Was the Devontae Adams trade, the Carr extension, not getting the 5th-year option on Josh Jacobs, so then you had to tag him the next year. The Chandler Jones signing, the Hunter Renfrow signing, like every move they made turned to poop. It was just, when you missed every single time, you really don't have a leg to stand on. There's no pick. There's no anything for them to point to and be like, see, we knew what the heck we were doing. None of it worked. Flat out, none of it worked. So, it's really hard to, the timing seemed, I didn't expect it whatsoever. I thought with his contract, whatnot, he's at least getting through the season. I truthfully thought they were going to retain him to, like, we'd be talking about this maybe week 4, week 5 of next year. But it's hard to really say that, they're going to miss out, that, the vision, things were starting to turn around.
I think that the word I kept using when I was talking about it with my editor is like, it's directionless and rudderless, but at the same time, very intentional. Like no other new coach and new GM makes as big of swings as they did right away. 1st and 2nd round pick for Devontae Adams and made him the highest paid receiver. They signed Derek Carr to that contract extension that I know was funny money, but still made this contract extension and technically, publicly, this commitment to Derek Carr.
But also, like, the contract extension got them to the point where they couldn't trade him.
Right?
Exactly. So they end up just having to cut a quarterback who, Josh Dobbs gets moved for a 6th, right? Like a quarterback that objectively should have gotten you picks back with how much the Saints signed him for after he was a free agent.
The other reason they couldn't have traded him too, because of the contract, in addition to the contract situation, is they freaking benched him and told him to not come to the games. They said, stay home. You know how much leverage you have in trading a player that you've already told to stay home? None. That they made it was a comedy of errors. And the first of which, again, was that first offseason where they signed Chandler Jones to this monster contract. Monster for where he was. He was 32 years old when they signed him to a 3-year, $51 million deal, where they end up having to cut for probably a situation no one would have saw. But still, you signed Chandler Jones. You trade and sign Devontae Adams. You don't have a 1st or a 2nd round pick in the 2023 NFL draft. Your first pick is in the 3rd round, where you select Dylan Parham, the guard out of Memphis, who's still starting for the team now. Then you go 6-11, and you're like, didn't work. Pull the plug, reset again, like a half reset, where you're like, we're moving on from Derek Carr. We're going to go get Jimmy Garoppolo. And I think that you make that shift with the expectation that it's going to improve the team, and it doesn't. And when no one saw it no one thought it was going to improve the team. That by itself is you making all these mistakes. You're just making mistake after mistake after mistake, mortgaging future capital, and just really submitting yourself to purgatory. Factor that in with the players hate you. Goodbye. Like it's not going to work. This isn't going to work. Like if you make all those bad moves, Devontae Adams isn't going to work. You were wrong on Derek Carr. Maybe you were wrong on the Hunter Renfrow extension. Blah blah blah. You were wrong on not tagging Josh Jacobs. If the players like you, you can fight, man. You can fight through that. Like if the players actually like you and the culture is there and they believe in the direction of the team, you can get there. The problem was not a single player was defending Josh McDaniels, right? The most positive comments you were getting from players were like Josh Jacobs saying, "It's not my job." When someone asked him, "How do you spark the offense?" He's like, "It ain't my job." Devontae Adams is literally like a loss for words. He's like, I don't know what to say anymore. And I don't know. When you get to that point and you lose a lot of games, I think the writing was on the wall. And like he is now the only coach in NFL history that's ever been fired halfway through his 2nd season twice. First time he got caught cheating and didn't perform, This time, tried to do a lot of the same things. We didn't even bring up the whole former Patriots. How many former Belichick coaches or former Patriots coaches under the Belichick tree have tried to sign the Patriot way in free agency? Like we're going to sign it in free agency. You know how we're going to get the Patriot way here? We're just sign Daron Harmon, Jakob Johnson, Brandon Bolden, Jimmy Garoppolo, Jacoby Myers, Chandler Jones. That doesn't work, and it's never worked. The same reason Matt Patricia, Joe Judge, Josh McDaniels, all these other Belichick tree coaches have not worked is that the culture they bring is a winning culture without the wins, right? Like they're like, oh, we're bringing a winning culture. Well, you're not winning anything. And that way, your culture when you're not winning needs to be the tune needs to be a little bit different. The attitude needs to be a lot different. I don't know, man. I get fired up about it because it feels so obvious to why it's not working. But you know why it's not working and continues to not work is the hiring process in the NFL is never going to change. Hire your buddies. Hire your friends. No matter how many times you use words like extensive and exhaustive searching process, we hired a committee to look at all this stuff. You're going to look at Patriots are winning games. We'll hire both those guys. Or before that, he hired 2 guys from TV. John Gruden out of ESPN's booth and Mike Mayock of NFL Network. Like the hiring process for any NFL team is not exhaustive or extensive. I think what doesn't get it's
hard though. It's hard to know. It's impossible to know. They make it's by design that they make it impossible to know how much someone in a different organization actually has contributed to wins. So that part.
I think it's impossible to know for sure, but it's not impossible to say it didn't work in Denver.
Yeah.
And
no, I understand.
You know what I mean? Like it's not impossible to say like this guy's already had a shot and it didn't work. Like giving him another chance. Is this where you want to be? I don't know. Like I think that, and like you're like, oh, you're gonna bring in Mick Lombardi as your OC, the same guy that you like. Are you gonna do anything different? Like I don't know. Like what needs to happen with the NFL when Mark Davis is going through this process again is you need to hire people that are going to do things differently. And I don't think that anything Josh McDaniels or Dave Ziegler were going to do was different. They were going to sign a bunch of Patriots, talk shit about their players, and create a bunch of bad relationships and tell their starting quarterback that they said they could win with to stay home the last couple games. That's ridiculous. Like that, and anyone could have seen this coming.
We'll get back to AG in a sec here, but when the game clock stops, it's time to order in with DoorDash. Order chips, dips, nachos, everything you need to make your own nachos on DoorDash and get it all delivered without missing the game. Kick back at kickoff with unbeatable deals on everything you need for the watch party or tailgate. Score football season's best deals on groceries, restaurants, retail, and more. Get prepared before game day. Stock up on your favorite appetizers and order all your tailgate gear on DoorDash. Then get ready to watch your team win. I know I'm partial to a few restaurants around me. 2 Hands over here in Nashville, Taku Ramen. Those are my go-tos on DoorDash. And right now, when you spend $15 or more, you get 50% off up to a $10 value on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. That's 50% off up to $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order with the code LOCKED23. Subject to change. Terms apply. I do think you hit the nail on the head there, though, about the Patriot way in terms of how they practice, how they treat players, and it's just not working when you're a losing team. Yeah. Like the beauty of what they did in terms of being so hard on the players is that it basically never kept a good team from staying hungry, right? Like they were hard on them when everything's good. When you've won 13 games in the regular season, then you can berate the guys because they know we're winning. At the end of the day, it's paying off, and that keeps them hungry. But when you're losing, everyone wants to win, right? Like no one wants to keep losing. You don't need to get in the face of grown men, give them extra time at practice when you're, what were they, 6-11 last year? Like you stink. You want to get better. You want to do better. So there does need to be a change of tune. So I do agree with that. But let's get to the coaches that are still in the NFL, still employed here, and talk the hottest of seats around the league. Who, AG, is your third hottest seat at head coach right now?
I'm going to move it to 3 just because I think he is the hottest seat if you go by technicality, and if you're doing betting odds on who's not going to be a coach next year, it's Antonio Pierce. Like I originally was going to put him 1, but like he had that press conference today. I don't know how old our listeners are, but Antonio Pierce is a former Giants linebacker, and Giants fans love the dude. He was hard-nosed. He's like a rah-rah guy, and you could see that. You could feel it in that opening press conference he had for the Las Vegas Raiders as this interim head coach, replacing Josh McDaniels. He's like, I'm from Compton, California. I rocked at NWA. I was born a Raider. I'm a former player. I can engage with players. Everyone knows my energy when I'm going into the room. I think my personality is going to impact this team. He said all the right things. If you could win a press conference, you won. Undefeated in his tenure. Problem is, I don't think he's going to right this ship at the rate that even Bisaccia did. Rich Bisaccia, who went 7-5 after John Gruden resigned in 2021 and went to a playoff game, Bisaccia wasn't even brought back as the head coach. And now maybe this is different. And if Antonio Pierce goes 7-5 or however many games are left in the season and they find a way in the playoffs, I think he'd have a shot. I just don't think that's possible with this roster. They're not starting Jimmy Garoppolo, and he says he gives us the best chance to win, that being Aiden O'Connell, the rookie. It's going to be a lot, right? Aiden O'Connell with this team, with this offense, I don't see him being someone who wins enough games for this Raiders team to make the playoffs and ultimately save these interim jobs for both general manager Champ Kelly and Antonio Pierce. So not by any fault of his own, but there's just no way. Like, Mark Davis needs to nail this next one, like absolutely nail it. And I don't think Antonio Pierce ultimately is going to win enough games for him to be the guy. Does Champ Kelly stay around? Yeah, maybe, just because hard to evaluate a general manager at an interim level. But still, like I don't know if Antonio Pierce is ultimately the coach in 2024.
Yeah, a weird definitely situation there. But I didn't include Antonio Pierce because too low hanging a fruit to put on a hot seat. Don't want to do that right away. My number 3. I went Brandon Staley, Los Angeles Chargers, because they're 3-4 right now. Mm-hmm. And I still think they're a dangerous team. I still think they're better than a record. I still think they can get to the playoffs. But their next 4 games are against the Jets, Lions, Packers, Ravens. There's a very real chance they're 4-7 at that point. And when you have this guy who's committed to analytics year 1, and then he stops doing that year 2, and now he's like back and forth on whether he's in or he's out on analytics decisions year 3. And he's a former DC who you brought over thinking he's, the next Vic Fangio, who no matter what, you're going to have a good defense. And they've ranked 29th, 20th, and 26th this year in terms of points per drive allowed. With, a quarterback who really doesn't turn the ball over much on the other side of the ball. So you can't blame that. You can't blame what the offense has done to this defense. Defense has just been bad. And they're not getting any better. They're even looking worse. So those two things combined, again, if it bottoms out this year, not bottoms out, but if you go below 500 with this roster, I think he would get fired at that point. Fair or not fair. It's just, especially when it's your side of the ball, that's the one that's, causing the issues here. It's not the offense. That's the problem. It's that defense. That's been the problem. That's just a tough pill to swallow as head coach.
Yeah, I have Brandon Staley on my list. I won't say where I have him high. So I guess I could say I have him 1. I think Brandon Staley is not a seat because I don't even think it's if they go below 500. I think if the Chargers miss the playoffs, it's done. It's done. Like done. They can't continue with Brandon Staley if this team makes the playoff or misses the playoffs, because you had the embarrassing playoff loss last year. This year started off slow for a lot of the same reasons. They got into a new offensive coordinator, but the defense is so bad that they can't win games consistently. They're not consistently leading games. My opinion of the Brandon Staley situation, beyond the 4th down decisions and him kind of waffling on that, is he's also, and I know that the GM, I think it's Tom Telesco there for the Los Angeles Chargers, is responsible for these decisions ultimately. But think about what they've done to add to that side of the ball. J.C. Jackson, Khalil Mack. I remember they brought in the defensive tackle, Sebastian Joseph Day. Like they were like, we're going to try and help you. We're going to bring in Eric Kendricks. We're going to bring in Kyle Van Noy. We will do what it takes. We want this defense to be better too. And it's much of the same. And for that to be his side of the ball and him to continue to struggle to right that ship, in my opinion, is the bigger flaw here. Then you factor in that you're wasting the prime of Justin Herbert. I don't know. And we forget that, remember playing Mike Williams in that meaningless game, ended up keeping Mike Williams out of the playoff game that they ultimately lost? That, like, there's some of these other decisions that he's made that have just been nonsensical. And at that point, bringing in a coach for a fresh start, I almost feel like is necessary, because there's going to be – now, I don't think the players by any means are out on Brandon Staley, and I think that's a big reason why he stayed. I think the players like playing for Brandon Staley. I think the problem is that if you don't make the playoffs again and the defense sucks again, I think this is the last straw, even for that locker room, right? It's a locker room that I think expects a higher standard of success, specifically postseason success, knowing that they have that dude back there. They got Herbert. Herbert should get us in these wins. And the fact that they're not, I think something does have to change ultimately.
Yeah, and I will say to the personnel decisions, when you're trading for a guy, signing a free agent, big money free agent like J.C. Jackson in the Khalil Mack trade, that 100% has the head coach's fingerprints on too. Those are indecipherable. Like the draft day decisions. Draft day decisions can be the GM. There's a separation there between college scouting and NFL scouting. But when you're seeing guys who play in the pros that you played against, that you're watching against other pros, you have as good an eye, you should have as good an eye as a head coach as any GM. And then when it's going to be that big of a contract that you've given to J.C. Jackson, or that big a trade that you're making for Khalil Mack, you were involved. So that falls back on him too. That's the fact that those guys were, I mean, Mack, a little impact, but definitely not worth what they gave up. And then J.C. Jackson was just a disaster. One of the worst free agent signings in NFL history. So has to be on the hot seat. All right, what's your number 2?
That's a really good point that I don't think enough people bring up with head coach and general manager roster decisions. I think that a head coach in the draft probably has a little more say in the first and maybe second round of selections, but also not maybe as involved in some of these other selections that he has full scouting teams for and the general manager is working on. But for free agency, if you're handing out a top 10 contract at a certain position, the coach is going to know, and the coach is going to be involved, because it would be malpractice if they weren't, right? It'd be absurd if they weren't involved. Like, oh yeah, we're going to sign this player that the coach has no impact on saying yes or no to like a big monster contract.
He's like, who's
Whereas
Jase Jackson?
With the draft, that's just not going to happen. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, back to the rest of that lengthy conversation with Austin Gayle here in just a moment. But first, today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest DFS platform in North America. The easiest and most exciting way to play DFS is just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. PrizePicks is really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of player and stat types are what make PrizePicks the number one daily fantasy sports app. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL with code LOCKEDON NFL.
All right. Well, my number 2, and obviously we won't be able to get to my number 1. I have my boy, Dennis Allen, Mark Davis's first head coaching hire. The reason why I think Dennis Allen's in the hot seat is I think that this is the year. This is the year that the Saints tear it down. I think after this year, and I know they gave Carl that money, and I know that he's locked in for that quarterback position for the foreseeable future. I think that they really need to reset on that staff. The offensive coordinator has question marks. The defense has question marks. They need to reset on that staff and bring someone in to have some juice. I just don't know if Dennis Allen and continuing with Dennis Allen is going to right the ship in New Orleans. And they're not going to be able to make any changes to the quarterback position for at least the next few years. I think Derek Carr's contract doesn't give them an out until after the 2025 season. That, to me, are you committing to Dennis Allen through 2025 then? Like, no matter what? Like, I just don't see how – if the Saints don't win this division, competing with the Falcons, the Panthers, and the Bucks, where the Falcons just benched their starter. The Panthers just won their first game last week, and the Buccaneers are starting Baker Mayfield. If you can't win this division, with all the money you gave Derek Carr, I do think that changes have to be made. And now you never really say coaching changes need to be made if you don't win the division. But I think that's the only way the Saints make the playoffs. They're not going to win enough games to be a wild card spot. They need to win the division to make the playoffs. And I think if they miss the playoffs after signing all this money to Derek Carr, and you talk about coaches being connected to roster decisions, Dennis Allen coached Derek Carr a long time ago. And he had to have had a hand in this decision. So if it doesn't work out and you end up having a losing record and you lose out to Taylor Heineke and the Atlanta Falcons, how does a change not get made?
Yeah, see, my thing is, though, one, I think they do win this division because of all the points you made about the rest of this division being pretty poo. And two,
you've used poo twice now.
Well, I'm technically not supposed to curse. I go through actually, I make notes of all the times you curse, just so I can go back and mute that. So,
oh my gosh,
but keep going. Don't go off. Sorry. I don't need you. I don't want to hold you back. But so I think they win the division. Two, you don't get under the cap situation is such that if you want to do a hard reset, you will not hard reset your cap until 2026. Mm-hmm. That's a fact of life. They literally cannot do it. They cannot create enough cap. They can only create enough cap space to get under the cap next year. And that's only by pushing more into 2025 to then get under for 2024. And so basically, if they don't sign any free agents next year and sign any free agents 2025 and let all those guys walk, 2026, you can have a blank slate. But you can't really have a blank slate until then in terms of a real.
That's insane.
Like good cap situation. So from that perspective, I think they're more likely to, if it doesn't work out, they don't win the division. I think Pete Carmichael is the fall guy, offense coordinator. That's what I would bet happens. Cause it's like, hey, you said Derek Carr, you said you could work with him. You didn't, it looked like poo for the third time today. And now it's your fault. Dennis Allen stays because you get a new head coach. You're in a 2-year rebuild anyway. So there's really no.
But why not bring in? And now I don't think we've brought up his name yet, but Mickey Loomis has to be looked at here. We have to look at Mickey Loomis as a guy that the Saints.
But they still win, right? They're still 4-4. It's not. This isn't like they have done this.
If the ownership can't see that still winning isn't working, like since the Drew Brees era, it's been Jameis Winston, Andy Dalton, Derek Carr, and it's a team that is going to be 500, slightly below 500, or slightly above, at best losing their first playoff game, or at best losing their second playoff game. How does ownership not say, this isn't working for us anymore? This isn't championship chasing. This is nothing. You're kicking the can and kicking the can and kicking the can. Why not fire Dennis Allen, potentially move on for Mickey Loomis? You bring in some people who you're like, hey, you got a long-ass leash, because we know you're entering. I remember when the Raiders, I keep bringing it back to the Raiders, wearing the shirt. When the Raiders first hired Reggie McKenzie, and they're like, dude, this place sucks. We need you to clear out. Like, we like cut anyone, do anything, get us out of this cap hell that we're in, and then let's start making some plays. That gave him, you get this like opportunity to like this. Your first year is kind of like a red shirt. If a new coach and a new GM came in for the New Orleans Saints in 2024, it'd essentially be a red shirt year. Where like they don't care how many games you win, they just need you to figure out the cap stuff and try and maintain a culture through what is going to be an obvious teardown. And I don't know. Does that not make, if you're a Saints fan, does that not sound more interesting and more enticing than firing Carmichael as the fall guy and then going there? Maybe, and now I'm getting into the fans' perspective, and I know this was a ranking of hot seats, but I don't know. I find myself, if I was a Saints fan, I want to move into a new era faster than 2026.
Unfortunately, though, that's the bet they made. But I would be more of the opinion that you give Mickey Loomis the directive of, hey, redo this, like reset.
Yeah.
Like instead of saying like no more of that, right? Because he's been there 20 years. He built up the first Super Bowl champion there, then a decade of prosperity after that with the New Orleans Saints. And yeah, Drew Brees had a big hand in that too. Sean Payton had a big hand in that too. But his draft track record, free agent signing track record, is as good as it gets in the NFL. Like they were perennially a 1 and 2 seed there in the late 2010s in New Orleans. Like they were, stones throws away from the Super Bowl if things would just bounce a different way. So they were on the doorstep. And so he built that up. Like I think he deserves some credit and deserves, honestly, what Jason Light's getting in Tampa Bay, which is, hey, you can work through this doldrum that is the post sort of Super Bowl window hangover, that we'll give you the allowance to work through it. and then kind of evaluate once we start going on the upswing, once we start having cap space, once we start getting, in a different roster situation, then we can evaluate. I think that's you afford Mickey Loomis that. So you give him at least through next year to see what he can do from that perspective. Because, really the only thing he did wrong was hold on too long. He didn't misevaluate talent. He wasn't necessarily drafting poorly. He just held on too long to a cap situation that was untenable. So that was just to try to win more games in the short term, which was probably.
I'm going to add this. So. Last thing on the Saints conversation, and then we can jump to your number one. But I agree that he has one of the best track records in terms of hiring or signing free agents and identifying talent. I don't know. I think that well is drying up. Can I read you the last 5 first and second round picks, or 5 draft classes, specifically first and second round picks for the Saints? This year was Brian Brzee and Isaiah Foskey. Who knows? We'll see where they end up. Haven't been impact players this year. No conversations for either of those players being a defensive rookie of the year. Whatever. 2022, Chris Olave, who they were struggling to get into the end zone for whatever reason, but I do think he's a talented player. And then their other first-round pick was Trevor Penning. But remember, Chris Olave, yes, was a good pick, but do you remember that they traded up monstrous to go get him?
They wanted him.
Then you go to 2021, Peyton Turner, Pete Werner. 2020, Cesar Ruiz was their only first-round pick, no second-round pick. 2019, didn't have a first-round pick. They drafted Eric McCoy in the second round, who's their starting center, and maybe that's good. Marcus Davenport, first-round pick in 2018, they traded up for. And then you go back, and then that's when you get into the 2017 class.
Yeah.
Marshawn
That's still not. That's
Ramsey,
far from a bad track record, though. I think Alontae Taylor was in there too. Did you miss Alontae Taylor?
Okay.
He was in there somewhere.
I don't know if he was a first or second-round pick, but yeah.
I think he was a second-rounder last year.
Oh, you're right. Alontae Taylor's there.
That was, and that's a good pick. So I struggle to call that a pure doldrum on the par of, what the Raiders have done in the first and second round. So
okay, no one's touching the Raiders. The Raiders have been the Raiders have had the worst draft record probably ever that will ever go down. Did you know this, that if the Dolphins and the Lions win a playoff game this year, which I think Dolphins is extremely likely, Lions is also maybe likely. Who knows? They maybe win a playoff game this year. The Raiders will have the longest active drought for a playoff win in the NFL at 21 years or whatever it is. And I think the biggest reason for that has been the draft record, bro. I mean, they have not had a good draft pick since, Khalil Mack, their last good first-round draft pick that actually ended up being 2+. They turned into all those picks. I think Darren McFadden, some people will bring up. Amari Cooper was obviously good, but they ended up trading him. I don't know. Their draft record is one of the worst in the NFL.
I remember I was a child and only would read draft magazines and just watch college football. And even I would watch the Raiders drafts and be like, this is horrible. What are they doing? Darren McFadden at 4? Just be like, no.
Remember when they drafted Robert Gallery at number 2 overall, or whatever it was? And they made some decisions.
Darius Hayward-Bay, top 10.
Over Michael Crabtree, over Jeremy Maclin. Reggie McKenzie's first draft, he brought in DJ Hayden at 13th overall when I think guys like Darius Slay were in that class. I think Desmond Trufant was in that class. They made some calls. Dude, we haven't even brought up Damon Arnett. They brought in Jonathan Abrams.
Once you got to the Gruden era, it was little show who they were going to draft. I still, oh my God, one of my favorites was their very first draft, I think it was, when they had the 4th overall pick, the Cleveland Ferrell pick. Someone tweets out the day before, it's going to shock the world. And in my head, I'm like, oh man, they're going DK Metcalf 4.
I think that was Peter Schrager.
Yeah. And boy, did they freaking shock the world. One of the worst top 5 picks I've just ever seen. That to me is the most obvious. Why didn't you pick this guy? Because I think everyone does that in the draft where they're like, why didn't they just pick this guy? Why didn't they pick Josh Allen? Same size. Remember their justification? He said that Ferrell felt like more of a 6 technique or something, a guy that could take on tight ends. When they were literally the exact same height and weight, Ferrell just had a half-inch longer arms. And it was he just felt like more of a guy. It's no, that one.
And Josh Allen hasn't been this world beater by any means, but he's a good player. He's a good productive player. I don't know. Anyway,
if he's your 4th overall pick, you're very happy that you got Josh Allen. You just are. That's just how it is. He's better. He's better like Chase Young. All right, I got 2 more. I'll breeze through these because they're pretty self-explanatory. Ron Rivera, number 2, Washington Commanders. I don't even think he wants to coach there anymore, man. I think he's sick of this. It's absolutely a joke at this point. When you're trading away Chase Young and Montez Sweat, I have no behind-the-scenes info on why that's the case, but it's how could you not make this work, right? You had two uber talented young edge defenders. How are you not set for the next decade? I don't know. That one never made sense. Their draft decision on the defensive side of the ball. And again, I don't know how much a hand he has in these things. I don't know what it is, but none of these, like Jamin Davis, Ben St. Juste, Fedarian Mathis, Emmanuel Forbes, Quan Martin, who's actually really hasn't played, so I can't really say much on him, but no impact from all four of those guys. None. Secondary SIP. You're 29th in points per drive against on defense. I just, maybe a lot of these decisions are out of his hands, but again, you were 7-9, won the East in 2020. You've only gone backwards since then. Things have not gotten better. And truthfully, like, it looks like you're in the start of an absolute spiral here for this franchise. It does not look like it's getting better anytime soon. So
my thing with Ron Rivera is obviously there's this, maybe Eric Bieniemy gets the opportunity next year, but there must be a lack of information that gets to DC, because we obviously had the Ron Rivera thing where he didn't know they were eliminated from the playoffs. And that was like an embarrassment for anybody. Then I keep coming back to that quote where a reporter brought up how often Sam Howell's been sacked, and Eric Bieniemy's like, he's been sacked that many times. It's like, what are you guys doing? What are we doing here? You are the coaches of the team. I think they're not even invested. You got reporters who are like, yeah, he's technically on pace for 96 sacks. They're like, that many? It's like, dude, you are, sorry for cursing, you are the coach of the team. How do you not know? Anyway, I don't know. Washington's
that's why I was saying ownership.
Yeah,
I don't even know Ron Rivera wants to be there anymore. Honestly, it doesn't seem.
Well, I think ownership stepping in, they're like, dude, this sucks. Can we just restart? Like Josh Harris. Did you watch? We haven't talked about this, and it would have been perfect for our old podcast tailgate. But Josh Harris, I think it was a preseason game. The new owner for the Washington Commanders. Dude was bombed at his. He was in the booth with the commentators at a Washington preseason game. Do you remember this?
No, I don't.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to send you the tweets after this because dude was shelled. Celebrating, living the dream. But dude was shelled. I think he's ready to party a little bit. And he's like, dude, rip this thing down to the studs. Trust the process. He was in that same ownership group with the Philadelphia 76ers. It's like, dude, we don't have it here. Let's get rid of Montez. Let's get rid of Chase Young. At the end of the year, I think I clean house and we try and do something else.
It feels like that Madden franchise season where you're just like, all right, I'm just going to start simming the games. I'm done trying to make this team work. We're going to sim and we're going to go to the draft. That's what it feels like right now for the Washington Commanders. All right, my last one. I don't know how we even didn't say this because it's 100% him. He is the most on the hot seat. He's maybe more on the hot seat than anyone's ever been on the hot seat. It's Matt Eberflus.
Yeah.
He ain't going to last, dude. He's 5-20 as a head coach. He has had 2 different assistants literally fired already this year. He's had to fire his running backs coach that just happened, David Walker, for impropriety, apparently, or something. They're, again, cagey. No one's doing any freaking research into what's going on in this building, apparently. But David Walker gets fired. Alan Williams got fired, the DC, earlier this year for...
He had to resign.
Again,
He's taking care of his family.
Okay.
He's taking care of his family.
For Lord knows what. Because, again... No one's doing any investigative journalism in the Chicago area. So we don't know what happened to these guys, but both are gone. And if you're having to let go your running backs coach, your DC, it's like, dude, it's a matter of time.
That's another situation too, though, where it's like Eberflus is like, this ain't for me. You know, there's a world where Eberflus is like, honestly, should I go back to being a DC? Because this is rough. Like my DC quit on me. Quit on me. And my running backs coach, and I was reading the tea leaves a little bit here. This is not a report. This is kind of how I'm reading it. But like when they did the interview about it and like talking about it, there was like this standard he mentioned of being on time. And I wonder if this guy wasn't even showing on time to meetings. I don't know. Again, I'm not reporting anything, but like to call out specifically the standard of being on time as what's part of this standard when you fire a running backs coach, that is banana land. To me, I think Eberflus is like, dude, if I was just calling defensive coordinator for some good coach here and he's taking the heat, because he doesn't seem like a guy who likes the media either, versus our guy Arthur Smith, who I think loves it. Literally loves it. This dude loves the media. Every fantasy guy wants to hate on him. He loves the media more than anyone could ever think. He is obsessed. Every time he goes up to the podium, he's looking to drop a bar.
But then also Chicago, and dude, Arthur Smith's hilarious. I hope he never gets fired, honestly, because it's great. The content's unbelievable.
It's so good. It's so good. He's also got a great stash. So does the
yeah.
DC there in Atlanta. They got a good stash thing going.
But back to Eberflus, just one last point. It also feels like, though, this is like an Eberflus polls, almost like what we're talking about with the Raiders, where everything they've touched turns to poo. Like they have not made a hit yet. You know, the free agent signings, Tremaine Edmonds, Yannick Ngakoue, you had the most cap space in NFL history. And
what's your opinion of the Montez Sweat trade? I didn't really get trading a second round pick. Yeah.
It was that's what free agency's for, dude. That's not what you trade second round picks for. Not to say those guys, maybe not Montez Sweat's caliber, come available, but I mean, Brian Burns, Josh Allen, Montez Sweat, Chase Young, all going to be free agents. Are they all going to re-sign with the teams that they were on? I mean, if the Commanders are looking to deal them, they would have let them walk after the season anyway. So you would just gone highest bidder. Like, it's reeked of, let me try to save my job. And it's like the same top of the second round that, you know, Chase Claypool was last year. You're giving away premium picks for guys that, I mean, Claypool's case, into diddly poo for you.
What I will say, and I won't say poo, the Chase Claypool trade when it happened, I was like, this guy, even not on an expiring contract, isn't worth it. Like, he's not worth a second round pick. Like, the talent isn't worth what he traded for. With Sweat, in a vacuum, contracts out the window. I think he's a second round caliber player in terms of who you're trading for. The problem I had with it, again, is what you're saying. You're going to have to sign him to this big deal at the end anyway. Why not? It's halfway through the freaking season. Wait.
This is not the time to make that move.
And you're losing. You're starting Tyson Badgett this week. It's not the time to be buyers at the deadline. Wait until free agency and flash the checkbook a little bit, Pauls. You could have lured Montez Sweat in free agency. And if you couldn't, this is the other thing too. GMs and coaches, and we talked about this a ton, they lock in on players. They lock in. They're like, they're overconfident. Like, we have to go get this guy. When you're oftentimes playing the probabilities, and it's like if Montez Sweat signed a tag in the offseason, it's all, man, we wish we traded for him at the deadline. There's going to be other players available. And you're not going to make some of these mistakes, like trading a second-round pick for a guy that you're going to have to sign to some monster deal because the leverage is toast. Everyone forgets about the leverage piece too. It's like, you think Montez Sweat's going to ask for pennies on the dollar? He's going to ask for a Berg's truck. Why? Because they just traded a second-round pick for him. I don't know, man. Like, it kind of reminds me of, what was the Bradley Chubb trade? What did they trade for? Wasn't it a first? And then you had to give him this money, and he's been fine. Maybe even less.
That one, we went in on that one too. Like that one, I went on that. That was not a good trade either. Like, that was, again, that is what free agency is for. Free agency is you sign those guys, and maybe you don't get guys of, again, that caliber. But you could have this past offseason, you could have gotten Zadarius Smith, Jadeveon Clowney. If you signed both those guys this last offseason, you have a 10x times better edge rushing group than the Bears have right now.
This is where I come back to ownership, and I've been thinking more about ownership as I wrote that Josh McDaniels piece and stuff. Like, I get wanting to give a GM and a coach, something that's thrown around a lot, like full reign, carte blanche, do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. If you are trading for players, high draft capital for players, first and second round picks, and then especially players that you're going to have to sign to contracts in the near future, if not at the end of the year, I think ownership needs to look at that decision and approve it, yes or no. And maybe they did, but if you're an owner and you're seeing that and you're like, oh yeah, let's do it, you're not in a position to make that decision. You're not in a position to be that, because like, this is one that feels so obvious. I don't know, when it gets to these kind of obvious mistakes, what's the best case scenario here? The Bears start winning games when Justin Fields gets back and they narrowly miss the playoffs with like an 8-win season. They sign Montez Sweat to make him the second or third highest paid defensive end, and he plays, I'm talking best case scenario, like maybe the 6th or 7th best defensive end in football, maybe 8th or 9th best defensive end in football.
I mean, that would be an utterly crazy scenario, though. And
so you put out those range of outcomes. You're like, that's the best case scenario. It's also very unlikely. You run that out, it takes you 10 minutes. You're like, what the fuck are we doing? Let's not do this. I don't know. Some of this stuff, man. And it comes back to, and this is full circle now, it comes back to the inputs for who is making these decisions in the NFL is not changing at the rate the league is changing. Who gets the positions of ownership, who gets the positions of GM, and who gets the positions of coach and all these key decision makers, how those hiring processes are happening is not changing at the rate that the league is changing in terms of what makes a high value decision versus a low value decision, with how positional value has changed, how the salary cap is changing, how the rookie wage scale has changed. Instead, we're still hiring Lombardis. We're still hiring Belichick's friends. We're still doing all these things that the teams that are actually having success are ones that, I don't know, I think are moving away from some of that stuff and are trying to change things.
I don't know. I will say, though, it just feels like a decision to try to save your job. I think it's a bigger thing is that it's more like short-term versus long-term focus in decision-making. You have guys prioritize short-term because that's job security for them. And so Ryan Poles, this decision reeks of, I need to win 4 more games this year, 5 more games so that I still have a job next year. As opposed
and how much
to,
of that,
I care about winning an NFC North title or a Super Bowl.
I agree with that. And I don't want to go along on this. I know we're over time, but and I got to leave actually, but how much of that is ownership setting poor expectations?
Yeah.
If I was an owner and I come in, you bring in Josh McDaniels and you bring in Dave Ziegler. The number one metric you're trying to move, if this was a lemonade stand, is not selling lemonade. I need you to get the players to like you, and I need you to put a plan together where this is going to work in 3 years, where we're selling lemonade in 3 years. If you're an owner and you're setting bad expectations that forces your GM and forces your coach to make these short-term decisions, you're the one who's the failure, right? You're the one who's making these mistakes. If Mark Davis told Josh McDaniels that, hey, I want to make the playoffs next year, and I know they just made the playoffs, but still, that roster wasn't good enough. That roster was not good enough. And I don't know. I do feel like we're talking long, and I'm just frustrated. I just want people to make some better decisions. How many times do we get on these pods and we're like, what are we doing? What are some of these people doing? These people are paid millions of dollars for all these decisions, and we just keep hiring our buddies and our brother and making the same calls that we've made and short-term decisions versus long-term, all that stuff. But anyway, I'm fired up, and I'm sorry for cursing. Poo, poo, poo.
It's all right. I'll go through and blank them all out. Appreciate you coming on, buddy. We'll do it again next week.
Have a good one.
Peace. That was a doozy with Austin Gayle. It tends to be when he comes on the show. Tomorrow, we'll be ranking offensive tackle prospects with the one and only Brandon Thorne, the most knowledgeable offensive line expert online right now. Best out doing it. Cannot wait to pick his brain about this tackle class because it's a top-tier tackle class. The top 3, very impressed with those guys. I fully expect them all to be top 10 picks when it's all said and done. We'll get Brandon's thoughts, see if he agrees on tomorrow's show. Make sure you like, subscribe, follow, whatever it is on YouTube, wherever your podcast really helps me out. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a good one.